So there it is. There's that argument. We have to talk about it. You have to think about it. You have to read it over. Don't rely on my interpretation. Certainly, think it through. Uh, but as we look back on it, it's quite remarkable. And I am reminded of the Mino. I'm reminded of the slave boy and the Mino. I'm reminded of how remarkable, really, that whole thing is. Whether or not it proves that knowledge is recollection or not, it's remarkable because we have this example of a human being who starts out with nothing, knowing nothing about a particular subject, seemingly, either learning it or finding out that he already knew it, but certainly going to a different place with regard to his knowledge of mathematics, geometrical issue that they were dealing with in the Mino, which is quite interesting. Have we just gone through a similar experience ourselves, having read through Anselm's argument? Maybe we thought that God existed before, or maybe we didn't. But in any case, we could perhaps be said to maybe know it, but not know why, or not know exactly what we knew. But did we move from ignorance to knowledge by thinking through that argument, by listening to that argument? Did we go from not really knowing whether God exists to knowing now that God exists? That would be quite something, and it is a remarkable thing. And it's a remarkable argument, and it's a remarkable idea, and it must be a remarkable idea. That is the idea, which is the kernel of the argument. Let me see if I can get it right. Something than which nothing greater can be thought. That is a remarkable idea, if indeed it is a coherent idea. Because certainly what Anselm is claiming is that idea is something which is quite unique in the sense that if you understand that idea, if you understand that sentence, or what's being expressed there, you also you understand that the being that's being described exists in reality, not just as an idea or an hypothesis, which is a very remarkable idea. That is, if we can conceive of something than which nothing greater, and greatness here certainly not being something that is confined to greatness in magnitude, bigger or larger, but greatness in the sense, I guess, of containing every perfection, so that no being can be thought of which contains any more perfection or any perfection that this being has. No greater being can be conceived of. But as if indeed we can grasp with our minds that we find out that this being, by its very nature, must exist. That it's not a contingent thing. That is, I can hold an idea of many, many things in my mind which may or may not exist. And that's an issue here. But the claim about this idea is that if you could hold it in your mind, if you can clearly conceive of it, grasp it, then what you discover is that it absolutely must exist in reality, independent of you as well. That is not just an object of thought. It's an object which must have an independent existence in reality. That's my interpretation. And that sort of goes to chapter 3, that he cannot be thought not to exist. That is, that it's impossible to imagine that this being, the that than which nothing greater can be thought, does not exist. Its existence is necessary, and that there's no possibility that it doesn't exist. Its existence isn't contingent. We discover that its existence is a necessity. Arriving at the orthodox theological conclusion that God is a necessary being. You and I are beings, but we're not necessary beings in the sense that we exist, but it could be, we can imagine a possible world in which we as individuals don't exist. If something is a necessary being, its existence is a necessity, and therefore no possible world can be imagined in which that being does not exist, unlike ourselves, who are merely accidental or contingent beings. Which does raise a problem. If God is a necessary being, and if conceiving of God clearly enough as the being than which nothing greater can be thought, leads us to conclude, on pain of contradiction, that this being exists in reality as well as in the understanding, then how can the fool, David's fool, how can the fool say in his heart that God doesn't exist, that there is no God? Well, this gets a little tricky here, doesn't it? He says in chapter 4,